Low frontier wind over an empty street. Why did the strongest woman in red ash vanish from the sheriff's book? The same night, a man was found half buried in river clay. Pause, and why did the town lower its voice for years? Whenever anyone asked where Mara Chen had gone. Pause, the answer began before sunrise. Inside a forge at the edge of the main road. SFX, forge fire crackling softly. The valley was still dark blue then. The mountains had not caught fire with morning light. But inside Mara's shop, the coals were already awake. Iron glowed orange on the anvil. Mara lifted her hammer. Once, twice. Again. SFX. 3 clean hammer strikes on hot iron. Each strike rang through the street like a church bell made for working people. Her sleeves were rolled above the elbow. Soot darkened the line of her jaw. Her black hair was pinned tight at the back of her head, but a few loose strands clung to her cheeks from the heat. The men in red ash liked to pretend they did not stare. The women liked to pretend they did not whisper, but nobody passed Mara's forge without slowing down. Pause, a woman who could bend wagon iron by hand made people nervous. A woman who did not apologize for it made them cruel. Mara knew the sound of gossip better than she knew the sound of rain. She knew the pause outside her door, the lowered voice, the little laugh that tried to hide fear. She did not look up anymore. She worked. That morning she was shaping a brace for the old bridge across Bitter Wash. The town needed that bridge. They needed her hands. They needed her fire. They needed the woman they refused to sit beside in church. The iron flattened under the hammer, a final blow. Then she lifted the brace with tongs and plunged it into the quench barrel. SFX. Iron hissing in water. Steam bursts. For 1 white second, the whole shop disappeared. When the steam cleared, a man stood in the doorway with a horse behind him. He was tall and lean, with dust on his coat and a split along the brim of his hat. His horse was a bay gelding, head low, one front hoof held carefully above the ground. Mara set the iron aside. "Horse through a shoe," the man said. His voice sounded like it had crossed 100 miles without speaking to anyone. Mara wiped one hand across her apron. "Bring him in." The man led the horse forward. Most customers looked at Mara once, then looked away too quickly, as if caught doing something wrong. This man did not. He watched her the way a person watches weather carefully. Honestly, with the understanding that it could change a life. Mara crouched beside the gelding and lifted the hoof. "Name?" she asked. "Jonah Vale." "I meant the horse." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. "Saint." Mara glanced up. "Doesn't look like one. He has his moments." She ran her thumb along the hoof wall. There was river clay packed deep near the frog, pale gray, still damp. Not valley dust, bitter wash clay. "Pause. You crossed the wash after midnight," she said. Jonah's smile faded into attention. "How'd you know?" "Your horse told me." She stood and reached for a shoe from the rack too narrow. She took another, held it against the hoof, then carried it to the coals. Jonah leaned against a post, but did not crowd her. "You work alone?" he asked. "Always. No apprentice, no father, no husband, no brother, no man standing behind me so the town feels better." Jonah accepted the answer without flinching. Mara heated the shoe and began to shape it. Sparks leapt from the anvil and died in the dirt. After a while, Jonah said, "That bridge brace outside yours? The old one cracked. If it fails, half the town loses the only crossing before the floods. They know you're saving them trouble? They know? And they prefer needing me in silence." Pause. Jonah watched the hammer rise and fall. When the shoe fit, Mara nailed it with 3 clean blows and lowered Saint's hoof to the floor. The horse stood easier at once. Jonah placed coins on the bench, more than the work was worth. Mara pushed one back. "I don't take pity. It isn't pity. What is it? Good work. That should have been the end." But Jonah stopped at the doorway and looked back at the glowing coals, the blackened tools, the woman standing in the heat as if the fire belonged to her. Then he said, quietly enough for truth, loud enough for the street to hear, "Strength looks honest on you." Pause. Mara did not answer. Outside, 2 men who had been pretending to check a wagon wheel turned away too fast. Jonah mounted and rode toward the livery. The hoofbeats faded into the dust. SFX. Horse hooves fading down a dirt road. Mara stood a long moment with one hand resting on the anvil. Not because she had never been called strong. She had like an insult, like a warning, like a reason no decent man should look at her twice. But honest was different. That word stayed. By late afternoon, the sky had gone copper. Mara closed the forge doors and carried the finished bridge brace toward the back wall. The metal was cooling, but still held a buried warmth. That was when she saw the blood on the floor. Pause, not much. 3 drops near the coal bin, 1 smear beside the shelf where she kept her father's papers. Mara went still. Her father's claim deed was half out of its tin box. She crossed the room and opened it. The deed was there. So was the bridge contract. So was the folded letter from the county office proving the forge and the land behind it belonged to her. Not to the Rusk family, no matter what Gideon Rusk told men after whiskey. But the paper had been touched. Mara knew because the coal dust was wrong. Her hands were always black from work. Anyone else would have missed it. She did not. Someone had come into her forge while she was at the pump. Someone had searched, and someone had bled before leaving. SFX. Faint sighed. Doorbell twitches. Mara turned. Nate Rusk stood there, drunk enough to sway, sober enough to hate. He was Gideon Rusk's younger brother, a man with pale eyes, a pretty pistol, and the belief that every woman in town was only waiting for the right man to correct her. His right hand was wrapped in a rag. Blood had soaked through. That deed should have burned with your father, Nate said. Mara did not move toward him. You cut yourself on the tin box. You stole Rusk land. My father bought this ground. Your father was a railroad Chinaman with a lucky signature. Pause. The words landed in the shop and showed their teeth. Mara's face did not change. Leave, she said. Nate reached for the tin box. Mara caught his wrist. It was not dramatic. It was not wild. Her grip simply closed, and Nate's hand stopped being his to command. His face went red. He swung with the other hand. Mara turned, let the blow pass, and shoved him against the workbench hard enough to knock the breath out of him. The pistol fell from his belt and clattered under the anvil. SFX, pistol clattering across wooden floor. Nate tried to rise. Mara lifted the bridge brace, not like a weapon, like a boundary. You walk out breathing, she said, because I decide you do. Nate stared at her, humiliated and gasping. Then he backed through the side door and into the red evening. Mara watched until he was gone. She should have gone to the sheriff then. But the sheriff owed Gideon Rusk money. Half the town did. So Mara barred the forge, took the tin box to her cabin, and sat awake with her father's papers beneath the table. SFX, night insects and distant wind just after midnight. 3 riders stopped outside her door. No lantern, no greeting, only boots in the dirt and a voice from the dark. Mara Chen. She stood. A second voice said, "Come out before we drag you out." Then something struck the door. SFX, heavy blow against a wooden door. The frame shook. Mara reached beneath the table and pulled out a black iron pry bar, thick as a wrist, polished by years of use. Another hit. The wood split down the middle. Then hoofbeats came hard from the road. Fast, the men outside cursed. One of them said, "Leave it." The riders scattered. Mara kept the pry bar raised until the new horse stopped at her porch. A knock came. Once pause. Mara. His horse breathed hard behind him. "I heard men talking at the livery," he said. "They said Nate Rusk was missing." Mara's hand tightened on the door. "Missing is not my doing. I didn't say it was." They were not soft. Soft eyes were useless in a hard town. His were steady. Mara unhooked the chain. Jonah stepped inside and saw the tin box on the table, the split in the door, the pry bar in her fist. What happened? Nate came for my deed. He left breathing. Jonah looked at the floor, bleeding, his hand, not his life. A long silence settled. Then Jonah said, "They found a body by Bitter Wash." Pause. Mara did not blink, but the room changed around her. "Who, Nate?" The word seemed to steal the air from the cabin. "Half in the clay," Jonah said, like someone tried to hide him and gave up. Mara looked toward the dark window. River clay, Saint's hoof, the damp gray mud packed deep from a midnight crossing. Jonah followed her eyes. "What did you see?" he asked. "Your horse crossed after midnight." Whose? Couldn't tell. Mara breathed once through her nose, slow, controlled. They'll say I dragged him there. Because you could. She turned back to him. Jonah did not soften the truth. That is what they'll use, he said. Not proof. Fear. The next morning, Red Ash woke up hungry for a verdict. By noon, the story had already grown teeth. Nate had gone to Mara's forge. Nate had bled. Nate had ended in the river, and Mara Chen was strong enough to move a body alone. That was all the town needed. Pause. No one asked why Nate's boots were clean of forge ash but caked with river mud to the knee. No one asked why a line of rope burn crossed both his wrists. No one asked why the drag marks near Bitter Wash were too straight, too deep, too wide. For one woman pulling a dead man by hand, the town did not want the truth. It wanted the shape of the truth that made Mara smaller. Gideon Rusk arrived at sunset with 5 men and a shotgun. Mara was in the forge. She had not run. She had not hidden. She had gone back to work because the bridge brace still had to be set before the flood, and she refused to let the town collapse simply because it hated her. Jonah stood outside the open forge doors, one shoulder against the frame, not in front of her, not behind her, beside the entrance, where a man could be useful without making himself the point. Gideon Rusk stepped into the street. He was older than Nate, wider, with a beard trimmed close, and a grief that looked too much like ownership. You killed my brother, he said. Mara lifted the hot brace from the coals and laid it across the anvil. No. Gideon's face hardened. You were the last one seen with him. He was the last one who tried to steal from me. A murmur moved through the men behind Gideon. The shotgun rose a little. Jonah's hand drifted near his holster. Mara struck the brace once. SFX, single hammer strike, ringing through the street. Everyone flinched except her. She turned the iron with tongs. I left him with a cut hand and a bruised pride, she said. Not a buried body. Gideon stepped closer. You expect us to believe you could stop once you started? Pause. There it was. Not evidence. The old fear dressed as justice. Mara looked at every face in the doorway. The shop boys, the widows, the men who needed shoes fixed and hinges mended and axe heads sharpened. The same people who would let her keep their town standing but not let her name stand clean. Then Jonah spoke. You ever drag a man through wet clay, Rusk? Gideon turned on him. Stay out of this. Jonah did not move. I asked a question. Gideon's jaw worked. Jonah pointed toward the river road. Body was pulled by a team. Not carried. Not dragged by hand. One of Gideon's men scoffed. You some kind of lawman? No. What are you? Jonah looked at Mara's anvil, then back at them. A man who knows marks. Mara set down the tongs and reached beneath the bench. She lifted a broken chain link. The metal was dark. River clay dried inside the crack. I found this wedged in the bridge planks this afternoon, she said. Gideon stared at it. Mara held it higher. Fresh break, wagon chain, not mine. A boy near the hitching rail stepped backward. Mara saw him. So did Jonah. The boy was not a boy. Not really. 18, maybe. Thin shoulders, lantern jaw. Amos Crow, who worked the ferry ledger and slept behind the grain office. His face had gone the color of flour. Gideon noticed too. Amos, he said. Amos shook his head before anyone asked him anything. I didn't mean it. Pause. The street went silent. Every person turned. Amos backed into the hitching rail and nearly fell. Nate saw me with the toll box, he said. The words came out broken, too fast. Gideon, I swear, I only borrowed from it. I was going to put it back before the county man came. Gideon moved toward him. Amos raised both hands. Nate followed me to the wash. He said he'd tell unless I split it. He came at me. I hit him with the chain hook. He fell. I thought he was dead. Mara did not look away. Jonah's voice stayed low. So you tied him. Amos began to cry without making a sound. I panicked. Hooked the chain to the wagon. Thought the river would take him. Gideon stopped as if something inside him had been cut. The river dropped overnight, Mara said. Clay held him. Amos slid down against the rail. I heard folks blaming her, he whispered. I let them. No one moved. SFX, low wind moving through open forge doors. The wind pushed dust through the forge doors. The coals popped once in the firebox. Gideon looked at Mara then, not at the hammer, not at her arms, not at the strength he had feared, because it gave him a convenient answer at her. For one brief second, he seemed smaller than his own grief. "You could have run," he said. Mara lowered the broken chain link onto the anvil. "No," she said. "I could have let you be wrong." Pause that hurt him more. The shotgun lowered. The men behind Gideon shifted apart, as if the accusation itself had become something dirty and contagious. The sheriff arrived late, as cowards often do. By then, Amos was sitting in the dirt with Gideon's hand closed around his collar. By then, the town knew. By then, the woman they had made into a monster had given them their bridge, their murderer, and the truth. The next morning, the sheriff opened his book and wrote Nate Rusk's death under Amos Crow. Then he paused. He looked at Mara's name on the complaint line. The ink was still wet. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he scraped the nib across the page until the letters blurred. SFX, pen nib, scraping paper. That was how Mara Chen vanished from the sheriff's book. Not because she had fled. Not because the river took her. Because the town could not bear to preserve the record of how quickly it had chosen a lie. At noon, Mara set the new brace under Bitter Wash Bridge herself. The river moved below, low and brown, tugging at the clay bank where it had failed to hide a dead man. Jonah stood on the bridge planks with a hammer and a pouch of spikes. Mara looked at him. "You staying in Red Ash?" she asked, for a while. "Town may not like that." Jonah handed her a spike. "Town doesn't seem to know what it likes." Mara almost smiled. Together, they drove the brace into place, strike by strike. FFX, hammering spikes into bridge, timber, the sound carried across the water and into the valley. People watched from the road, but nobody whispered. Not that day. When the work was done, Mara walked back to her forge and took down the old sign above the door, the one her father had painted before his hands grew too stiff to hold a brush. Chen Forge. The letters were faded, the wood split at one corner. Jonah helped her lift a new board. This one had been burned clean with fresh iron marks. Chen Ironworks. Under it, in smaller letters, Mara had added a line no one in Red Ash ever forgot. Pause what holds, holds. Years later, travelers would hear a different version of the story. Some said the blacksmith disappeared after killing a man. Some said a drifter carried her away before dawn. Some said the river gave her back because even water knew better than to bury iron. But the people who were there knew the truth. Mara Chen did not vanish. The lie did. And after that, whenever someone in Red Ash crossed Bitter Wash Bridge, they heard the planks groan beneath their boots, and remembered the woman they had tried to break. The bridge held. Pause, so did she.